Welcome back, everybody. This is section 6.3, part 2. We're going to be talking about histograms. All right, so we're going to start with, there are three very common graphs that are used in research. So those are, one, the histogram. The second one is called a frequency polygon. And the third is called the ogive. For purposes of this section, we're only focusing on the histogram. All right, so let's start by defining it. The histogram uses bars to represent different frequencies. And the difference between a histogram and a bar graph is a bar graph, the bars are spaced apart. With the histogram, what you're going to notice is that the bars have no space in between them. All right, so for a histogram, we're going to use our class boundaries. All right, so I'm going to start by making a frequency distribution, very basic one. I'll start with class boundaries. And frequency. All right, so I'm going to say like 5.5 to 10.5 and 10.5 to 15.5. $15.5 to 20.5, 20.5 to 25.5, to 30.5, $30.5 to 35.5, and 35.5 to 40.5. And a frequency distribution is a wonderful way to organize your data. However, sometimes the graphical representation is what is needed in order to create some of those conclusions that you'd like to draw. All right, so here's what we're going to do. I'm going to scroll up. We're going to use this data. But I'm going to scroll up so we can create our graph. And I'm going to have a X and a Y axis. All right, what I'm trying to do here is I'm basically trying to get my class boundaries on the x-axis. Yeah. Let's get the last one. Not the greatest drawer in the world, but I do my best. So there's 0, there's 1, there's 2, there's 3, there's 4, and there's 5. And I'm going to switch colors just to get a little contrast in my graph. There is no requirement to switch colors by any means. So for 5.5 to 10.5, let's just scroll up. Now remember, I'm going to use this data. So you might want to pause so you can write down the data. That way, as I'm going through it, you're kind of watching what I'm doing. But basically, I'm going to use, so 5.5 to 10.5 is going to be 1. 10.5 to 15.5 is going to be 2. And then 15.5 to 20.5, again, all right, well, that's not that good. I'll try to make it better. Three, and then we're going to jump up to 5. And then 4. And then 3. And then 2. And you can color these in if you want. I'll just do this, change it to green just to keep the color consistent. And you can color each one of these bars in if you need to. It's certainly not required. Some people like doing it. I'm just doing it quickly like that. But what we can do is, instead of memorizing rules for symmetry, we can look at this graph and we can see that it is very nearly symmetric, right? That the left side and the right side are almost symmetric, yes? So again, using a graph might make it easier for certain conclusions. All right. All right, so here's our next example. You'll notice I have class limits, class boundaries, frequency. Very often you're always going to start with class limits because you have to start by dividing your data into those different class limits. And then you're going to create the boundaries based on how many classes that you have. All right, now remember we said when we make class boundaries, we go 1 digit more than the data allows. That way we have no data that sits right on our class boundary. So all of the data is going to be within the class boundaries, excuse me. But if we need to make a histogram, I'm really not going to look at the class limits anymore. I'm going to look here for my class boundaries, and I'm going to look at my frequency. So what I'm going to ask you to do at this point is pause the video and take a run at making a histogram, and we'll talk about an answer on the back end. All right, hopefully you made your histogram. Let's take a look and see what we can do. So I have an x-axis, I have a y-axis. My recommendation on a histogram is that you use a straight edge. Right? I'm not the greatest drawer in the world. I do my best. And I draw freehand to get a little, shorten this process a little bit to show you. But when you're making a histogram for somebody else, or to draw conclusions, even if it's just for you, very often using a straight edge would be really, really helpful. All right, so I can say, right, so here, down here, we're going to put our class boundaries. And then 163.5 to 10.5 to 57.5, 304.5. 351.5 and 398.5. All right. So now we need to make bars to reflect our frequencies. So the first bar should be 5 high. But a straight edge will help you be a lot more precise. The next one should be 9 high. A lot less ambiguity in what you're doing. And everything will just look a little bit better. All right, so the next two are 6 and 6. So I'm going to go up 6, go across, up 6, go across. All right, and now the next one, 257 to 304, is 0. And then 304 to 351 is 1. Now the reason why I'm showing you this is because if you have a class that is 0, it needs to show up on your histogram. All right, you can't just collapse a class because there is no frequency in it. All right, that definitely would have an effect on your graph. All right, so histogram can have a couple of different shapes. Remember, we take a look at our first histogram. It was very nearly symmetric, right? The left and the right sides were very nearly mirror images of each other. All right, it could be positively skewed, which means that the right half is stretched. Or it could be negatively skewed, meaning the left half is more stretched than the right. So this one, I would say, would be negatively skewed. All right. So again, that would be a conclusion that you could draw from the histogram that maybe you could draw from the frequency distribution, but I would say that to say this is negatively skewed would be a lot more obvious from the graph. All right, so a couple of more things about histograms. All right, a histogram can very easily show you the mode, right? So it can be unimodal. Right? It could be bimodal. Or it could be multimodal. All right, and again, the histogram would be very clear in showing you which one this could be. All right, a relatively short part 2. There's not much more to it. You're looking to make a histogram. I would definitely endorse doing some more practice, as well as drawing some conclusions from histograms. But I want to thank you guys for listening, and I'll see you all next time.